You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to the writingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS. Together as one, we get it done.
Hello, it's Friday and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello everybody, it's Friday and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Thank you so much for joining us here to talk about writing and all things books. We love it. Obviously, when you guys join in, we'll have an opportunity at the end of the show for you to ask tonight's author some questions directly. So please stick around for that. If you've got any questions, drop them in the chat. Aga is not here today, but I will do my best to keep an eye on all the conversations that are happening in that chat. Please get involved. There's a lot of people who get involved on a regular basis, and it's a really good thing to get involved with on a Friday, because you get to chat to people who are like-minded and like writing, like reading, and tune in every week to chat to each other. So it's a really nice space to be in the comment section. But yeah, if you've got any questions for tonight's author, which I'm sure some of you will, you get an opportunity at the end of the show to pop them in. And tonight is a special night if you're from the UK, because it's the return of the Premier League. Football starts tonight, so you may be joining us because you don't want to watch the football, or you may be joining us because you're such a fan of tonight's author. And that's fantastic. Either way, we're happy to have you here. And, you know, commitment to writing and commitment to the show. Tonight's guest has actually foregone watching some of the football, and he is a fan of the teams that are playing. I'm sure we'll get into that. But again, special commitment to be here with us. So please ask him questions and share some love by sending this around. Share it on all the socials. That would be much appreciated by us. But because Agat's not here, I'm going to get our guest on a little bit sooner than normal, just so we can have a chat to him, because normally me and Agat have a few minutes where we just chat to each other about things. But this week I've started swimming again. So if you've started anything this week and you've started a hobby or anything like that you've picked up after a long time, yeah, just let us know in the chat. Where is Agat? Paul says. I would say he's got really drunk and hidden in a bush again, but that was probably Harrogate. No, he's actually gone on holiday. He's in a caravan somewhere. I'm saying he's in a caravan. I actually remember reading a tweet that he was still putting up his tent. So he's not in a caravan, he's in the tent. So yeah, if you see a picture or you see Agat knocking around in Wales somewhere in his tent, take a picture of him and send it to all our socials. I'm sure we'd love that. But tonight, Paul, we've got a very special guest to come on and chat to us about writing. So without further ado, I'm going to get him on. Ladies and gentlemen, C J Grayson is with us.
Hello, Chris. Hello, everyone.
Hello. How are you doing?
I am excellent. How are yourself? You all right?
Yeah, good. It's nice to speak to a fellow Northerner, to be honest, having you on the show, because sometimes we get some people that are from down south, and not that we don't love them, but you know, it's nice to have a fellow Northerner on the show. I had to kind of work my way around what I was saying there. I was nearly digging myself into a hole. But yeah.
You were, and I was hoping that you didn't, and I'm glad you never. So yeah,
yeah. But yeah, how are you doing this Friday?
I'm really good. Yeah, just at home with the children who are in fact watching the Manchester United game. So if in the first half there's any screaming or shouting, it's probably an indication that one of them have scored. And because I'm a Manchester United fan, if they're cheering, it's probably because they've let a goal in. So I'm sure if that's the case, they'll rub it in. So yeah, we'll see.
All right, we'll listen out for that. Obviously, we touched on the start, Premier League starting. Who do you support if you're watching now? Just drop it into the chat. Let us know. Maybe me and CJ will have a little chat about that. Deviation. Obviously, we love writing, we love books, we love reading. But when you're not doing those things, you've got to have other hobbies as well. And Football teams are definitely up there if you're from the UK, or soccer if you're American. I know we've got quite a few American listeners, so I want to be inclusive there. But yeah, let us know who your team is. If you've got a team, drop it into the chat and we'll have a little discussion about that. But CJ, what we like to do before we get into your books and things like that is we always like to know how writing became something in your life. So I'm going to play another quick video, which is called The Road to Writing, and then I'm going to ask you to tell us how writing became something in your life.
So to be honest, when I was younger, I was more into numbers rather than words. And I was much better at maths than I was at English. Although during my school years, I wouldn't say I was a lot better at maths, but I preferred maths because of the definitive answer. It was just a case of it being right or wrong. But when I used to enjoy in English writing stories and coming up with things. When I was 15, I thought I'm going to write a novel. So it was basically about a small group of friends, and these friends started dying off, and it was around 45,000 words. So it did take a little while to write, but literally there was like one twist in it at the end, and it was a bit on the rubbish side, to be honest. And I wrote another one when I was 22. That one was a little bit longer, and it was based on the south of the UK. I'm sure it was Plymouth, and that was a little bit more complex, but equally as rubbish. And then at the age of 26, my wife has a tendency of always losing the phone. She's getting a lot better now. In fact, she has got a lot better now, but she always used to lose her phone, and she used to always say to me, "Chris, can you ring my phone? I've lost it again." So I'd ring her phone, and as I was ringing it once, I thought, what would happen if someone other than the people who were meant to be in this house answered the phone? What if there was someone there? And I thought, you know, it's quite a nice title for a novel. Someone's there. So I wrote this chapter of me ringing the phone and then someone answering it. And then that ended up being about chapter 7 or 8. And I spent 2 years on that novel, and it was okay. But I think when you're kind of new to something, you're very naive to it, and you think, oh, it's excellent, this, you know, like people are going to love it. I started querying agents and a few publishers, and I think I maybe queried 30 to 40, and I got one reply from an agent saying the premise of the story is quite good, but we're not looking to take anyone on. So I was like, okay. And because I was new to the game and I had these really high expectations of what I thought it was going to be, like I said, really, really naive. I was a bit beaten down. I was a bit put off by it, and I kind of left it. And 6 months kind of went by, and I thought, no, I don't accept it. I'm gonna go back over it, and I'm gonna make it a lot better. And I added several more twists, and I added a parallel plot line to go with the main one that I had, and it was much better. But instead of querying more agents and publishers, I heard about Amazon KDP, where you can self-publish through that. I self-published that, and I made so many mistakes. I made so many mistakes. It was laughable. So when obviously it come out on Kindle and it come out on paperback, and I was the first one to buy the paperback because I'd never seen it. I was that naive and daft. I actually forgot to get a printed proof copy to actually check the paperback. So when the book arrived in the post, I can remember the postman coming down the drive. I opened the door before he was even there. So, oh, geez, mate, nice one. And I opened it, and I looked at the front of it, and the front of it was fine. But then, like, the spine was what should have been the spine was halfway on the back, and I was like, oh, what on earth am I doing here? So I had to go back and fix that. And after that was out for a little bit, I did receive a couple of 5-star reviews, and I don't know if that was people who'd followed me for a little while on Facebook, or if that was just a bit of like, oh, he's had a go. It's 113,000 novel. It's quite long. It is a bit twisty. It's not perfect. There's errors with his grammar, maybe his punctuation. Let's give it a good go. We'll give it. But then you get the 1s and the 2 stars, and do you know them readers who were very what's the way to put it? Picky. I'll use the word picky, perhaps. And anyway, my skin was starting to thicken at this point because you were kind of getting these mixed reviews. And I thought, someone actually said to me, so what's happening next? And what are you going to write next? And I thought, well, I don't really know. But this book was based in like Luton and Hemel Hempstead and a little bit in London. So I thought, why not write something close to home? Why not write something Darlington-based? So I had an idea of two male detectives, and I don't know how or why the names come into my head, but Max Byrd and Orion Tanzy. And these two kind of figures came into my head, and the first scene, because I wanted the victim to be in the first chapter, and this was kind of based on a true event as well. So my own wife, well, actually my younger son Grayson, I think he was very young at the time, maybe 1, and he fell halfway down the stairs and landed at the bottom and had a bit of a nasty fall. So my missus, she took him to the walk-in to Darlington Memorial Hospital, and she was there for about 5 hours. You know what the walk-ins are like. But when she left, she left at 1 o'clock in the morning, and she said, I'm going to go to McDonald's. And her way to go to McDonald's was under a particular bridge. And I was on the phone to her at the time, and I thought, what would happen if there was someone waiting under the bridge? What would happen if they kind of stopped the car and then someone else opened the back seat, like took the baby? And I thought, I'm going to write about that. So that became my chapter 1. And then you just have to find another 100,000 words to kind of go with it and for it to make sense and put it into some chronological order that is actually a book. So that was the first of the Darlington books, and then I wrote another 2 Darlington books after that.
Nice. Well, people are definitely loving the books. Paul says, love all your books, CJ. And Laura, she says, great to see you, CJ. Maybe you know that person personally. But yeah, brilliant. So if you take us back then, obviously you're 15 years old and you attempt that first novel. And like you said, you gave it a real good go, because you didn't just stop at a few hundred words. Like, you really gave it a good swing. What made you do that in the first place? Where was the inspiration for you to attempt a novel at 15?
That's an interesting question, that, Chris. I'd always been into reading, and I think because I'd enjoyed coming up with much shorter stories at school when I was in secondary school, I thought, how hard could it be? How hard would it be? So I thought I will just give it a go, and I'll see. And I just kind of carried on, and the story kind of went where it went. Like I said, it was a very poor novel, and I'm glad it's in the bin, because that's truly where it does belong. But then I waited obviously 6 or 7 years before I tried again, and like I said, that one at 22 was equally as bad.
And did you try again because that itch just didn't go? Like, what was it again? Was there something significant that made you think? We have a lot of authors on the show that, maybe somebody passes away, or they get a break in their work commitments, or they get an opportunity to write. Like, equally, we've had people on the show that have worked full time, they write at night, into the early hours and things like that until they get the book finished. So what's your sort of backstory in that respect, in terms of you picked up again at 22, then you did another one at 26. What was the inspiration sort of around those times for you to carry on writing?
Do you know, I can't really recall a specific point. I think it was just kind of growing up and being a little bit into reading. And I think a turning point, Chris, for me was the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. I read books before that, but the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, really, for me, I read it and I was just absorbed by it. I was absorbed by the characters, the novel itself, the setting. And I'd actually, when the film had come out, I'd watched the film, obviously, with Tom Hanks in, and it really made me realise how much better books were compared to films, because I was mad into films. And to be fair, I am to an extent now, and I love TV series, but books, a thousand people could watch the same film, but 1,000 people could read the same book and it'd be 1,000 different stories. And that's what I really, really love about the books. And but there's no, like I said, I don't think there's any specific turning point when I thought, right, I'm 22 now, that's happened, I'm going to give it a go. I'm 26, right, I'm going to give it another go. I don't really think, I think it was just a case of going through them years and reading so many books and then thinking, right, it maybe perhaps an idea. I know that one at 26, which was my debut, Someone's There, that one did stem from my missus losing a phone. And I thought this might be a cool... Yes, Anna's right. Definitely is. This, might be a good concept for someone there. There's 4 or 5 points in the novel as a whole where you could relate that title to Someone's There. So I thought it was good, and I don't know what the readers think, but I do think it was a valiant first effort as a debut novel for like 110,000 words. So,
So you from the very first book, when you were 15, you said about it was friends disappearing, and then the second one you had ideas, and all your ideas for your novel seem to come from your own life experiences of going, oh, what if something really bad happened here? Is that something that you've always done? And can you elaborate as to, you have that what if idea, and then how do you then pan that out into 110,000 words? Like, what's that like in that process?
Good question. And I think if you asked any writer that, it would come back a different answer every time. Personally, for me, I would get that initial what if idea, and I would tend to write around 8 to 10,000 words. I will write obviously the first couple of chapters. I've got 2 series now. I've got the Darlington-based Max Byrd and Orion Tanzy series, and I've got the DS April Fisher Manchester-based series. So in my head, I already kind of know maybe the second or third or fourth chapter, I'm going to have to bring them characters back in. And normally it would start with a crime scene or something a bit exciting to hook the reader. Because I think there's so many, you can read a lot of things on crime writing or detective fiction, and a lot of people seem to say there's a lot of rules and it should start in a certain way, but I don't think there's any rules to any crime books. And I think if you feel like that certain book should be written in a certain way that you like, then there's a good chance that other people will like that as well. So
And what's it like? Like, take us through it in terms of, like, you're writing about what is essentially your deepest fears. You said obviously about your wife's phone, somebody else answering it, your child being kidnapped from under a bridge. Like, these are really dark places to go as a parent and a husband. Like, how do you sort of cope with the dark side of it, I suppose, in terms of going, right, what if that worst case scenario happened? I'm trying to imagine it into a novel of 100,000 words. I should imagine there's a lot of times where you type in and you're thinking, oh, this would be really horrible if this did happen. How do you navigate that emotionally?
I think I managed to, because I can, I can make the difference between fiction and reality. I think if that did really happen, I certainly wouldn't have my feet up, sipping a cup of coffee, writing leisurely about how it's happening at the time. But I think I've got the ability to switch off. Not, it sounds bad but not switch off emotionally, but just see the difference in the fact that it is fiction and that it isn't real. But I think these realistic ideas do make a good premise for novels, and I think the most successful books, especially crime, need to come from situations or plot lines like that, which readers can relate to and put themselves in the character's position, and then they'll obviously relate to that character. And as the novel progresses, hopefully root for them if they're the protagonist. And but I've got a strange fixation with horror films, and I always kind of have, and rightfully or wrongfully, I started watching the likes of Halloween, The Exorcist, when I was a lot younger than the age rating on that film should have been, like a lot younger. So I think that kind of got me into that dark side of stuff. You know, like films like Hostel and Saw. Quite a strange fixation about watching things like that, which does sound really dark, I know, but yeah, I think that's probably. But then I can watch that, and I know that it's just on screen. If that happened in real life, I don't think I would be smiling, to be honest. Obviously, but
yeah, we'll definitely throw that out there. But he says definitely agree that there are no rules in crime fiction. But on that, we often like to give the viewers maybe some advice or tips. So with you saying that there's no rules in crime fiction, that's a really good tip for a lot of people. But what would your top 3 tips be about writing crime fiction? What would you say to people?
It's a good question, that, Chris. I would say my first and foremost would be, don't worry about getting it perfect, because you'll never ever get it perfect. And I've heard of people say, "Oh, I've got writer's block. It's not coming to me. I can't think of. I've got so far, but then I can't get past that." And they'll spend days, sometimes weeks on it. Just get it down on paper or get it down on the laptop, because you can't edit a blank page. So even if the writing or what's written is bad, if you write, say, a 2,000-word chapter and you read over that, but then that links or sparks an idea for, say, the next chapter, and you end up deleting that 2,000 words, it doesn't matter. That's just the process, and I think the process is different for everyone. So number one for me would be just write something, and you can always edit it later. Number 2, I think you really need to read a lot. And this is a balance that I don't get very well, just because of due to time and commitments and stuff. But I would honestly love to read a lot more than I do. And it sounds really silly, but I'm almost envious of readers who don't write, who spend the time I spend writing, that they're reading and they're absorbing other authors' stories. And I'm almost envious of that they're getting to kind of do that, you know. So 2, I would say read a lot, because an example I gave was it's like playing a football match without doing the training to an extent. So and because obviously, like, I love to do it, I love to read. Number 3, don't worry about pleasing everyone, because you won't. You definitely won't. That's probably my biggest tip I would stress, because no matter how good it is, or no matter how good person A thinks it is, person B will disagree. And I think there's a lot, and I think that's where the thick skin comes in writing. And I think you should take criticism. You should take it well, but you should take it with a bit of a pinch of salt as well, because not everyone's opinion, it's relevant to them, and I can always appreciate that, and I can get that. But if it entertains you, and I think this goes back to the no rules thing as well. I think if it entertains you and it excites you, there's a really good chance it'll excite other people. And if you can get people that it excites, then I think you're successful to an extent. So
yeah, Anya says she definitely that sentiment. Chris says, don't worry about getting things right, just get it written, like you mentioned. And then Paul has commented, your latest April Fisher book definitely has Saw-like tendencies. So if we stuck on that comment, and we said with Saw-like tendencies, obviously Saw's quite known for being quite graphic and things like that. How do you write a scene that's maybe violent or graphic and do it well? Because on a you know, with Saw, for example, in a film, we can see it, and you know, we don't necessarily need to paint the picture in someone's imagination because it's there, and we can see how, you know, graphic or horrific, and we, you know, we're shocked by that. But how do we do that well on a page is my question. And how do you go about doing it?
Just through hopefully by great descriptions. And I think because each chapter, and this is something that I haven't known for a long time. This is actually credit to my publishing company, Joffy, and going through the editing stages of them. Is that because they actually said to me when I'd submitted my 3 Darlington books that I do a lot of head hopping, and I hadn't heard of the term before. And they said to me, even if you're writing in third person, you still need to write from someone's perspective, even though it's third person. So everything that happens in that scene comes from their perspective, even though they're not directly first person. So that was something that I really took on board. And that was something that, so if writing these scenes, I think you need a lot of description. I think you need to tell the reader about how the reader's feeling inside emotionally. But I think most of all, it's the graphic parts of it and the gore. And I don't think there's a lot of crime novels out there that do it. The likes of Chris Carter, he does it phenomenally well. Mo Hader does it well. There's authors I think who can really paint the picture, but I would say just by just being overly descriptive and just being almost to the point where you're reading it and you just kind of like, there's something not quite right with this lad.
Yeah. Well, no, brilliant. That's good advice, and obviously some good recommendations there. People are putting questions in the chat, which is great. If you've got any questions, put them in, because in the third part of the show, we will ask the questions directly, and I will save them. So if you've got any questions for Chris, please just put them in the chat. But we are going to move on to the next part of the show. I'm going to play a little video, but the next part is what's the story? And we do ask, I don't know if you could do this, Chris, I don't know if you got available, but we asked for an elevator pitch for your latest book. So if you've got a copy of Taken From Her Home there, then you might be able to read off the back, or you might know off the top of your head. I'm not really sure. But I'll play this video and then we'll get into it. So
yeah, please.
Just 1 second. So, Chris, what's the story?
Taken From Her Home, which is my most recent book, and it's the second in the Manchester-based DS April Fisher series. And yes, Paul's right what he was saying. In this book, I did try and include elements of Hostel and Saw, and I wanted to see that darker side in me, to be fair. And some of the scenes are a bit, put it this way, my father's partner said to me, father, that she needs to ring my wife and she needs to get her out the house because there's something going on in that head of his, type of thing. But I'll read you the blurb if you want, Chris.
Yeah,
so good. Mary's in the shower after a long day's work when the lights go out. Her phone screen flashes in the dark. The text is from an unknown number. You are not alone in this room. When she wakes, her head is pounding and there's a churning in the pit of her stomach. She's lying naked on the cold, hard floor of a room she's never seen before. The door is locked. There's a deep cut across her thigh. The key to the door has been sewn into her leg. It's the only way out of the room. Detective April Fisher must race against time to catch the killer in a sick game of cat and mouse.
Oh, brilliant.
So that blurb, actually, my publisher Joffrey come up with that, and I really, really liked it. And I think they've to be fair, they've only captured like in that. Obviously, the blurb's the hook, isn't it? And that's what that's what it's intended to be. But that's only literally that covers the first 4 or 5 chapters of. So hopefully readers will read that and be hooked in by that, and hopefully it doesn't put too many people off with like a key being sewn into someone's leg and
no.
Kind of
I mean, it does sound amazing. I'm thinking from a writer's point of view. Again, you've got Fisher's perspective there, hopefully, because obviously she's trying to solve the crime. Then you've got the girl who had obviously taken with the key in her leg. You've got her perspective, and then I'm assuming that you have the killer's point of view as well, maybe. But how do you navigate that from a writer's point of view in terms of giving the reader just enough so that they are hooked in every chapter, but also so that the narrative is progressing well?
That's a really tough question, and one that I don't think I've got a definitive answer to, but I will try my very best. I don't think actually in that novel I've got really the killer's perspective, because I think if an author includes that, you don't want to give it away, and if there's no mention of the killer or a chapter from the killer's perspective, then it kind of leaves that in the dark. So if the novel progresses and it's DS April Fisher and DS Matthew Phillips and the rest of the Greater Manchester CID, and they're going to these various crime scenes, then I think using that, a little bit of backstory about DS April Fisher. She's had issues with drinking too much alcohol. She's had a previous miscarriage. She's had relationship troubles with obviously previous boyfriends, and she's at that point when she settles and she wants to be alone. So as well as having a story what's got X amount of crime scenes, X amount of kills, and the brutality and the gore of those individual kills, I also like to include quite a bit, and it might work for some, it might work better for others, but a lot about the character itself, because I think if you read a book, and I know I've done it in the past, no matter how good the story is, if the characters aren't likable or you can't relate to that character, then you don't really care for the character. So I don't think the novel carries as much weight. So I think including a lot about the background of Fisher, how she's feeling, issues about the past, just like real person issues that I think everyone has to an extent, or they know someone who struggles with alcohol, or I think if you include that carries the story along quite well without having to use that killer's perspective. But then it depends what kind of novel you're going for. I think if it was just like a psychological standalone, or maybe you could use the killer's perspective and then hide that from the protagonist, and then that would build up for the reader, because the reader would know what was going to happen before the protagonist did. And that's another way that you can build tension. Or you can do it how I've done it in this, where the reader doesn't know anything, so they're in the dark as much as the protagonist is. And there's different techniques to do it, and I don't think anyone will ever do it the same way. And I think that's what makes writing and reading so brilliant, because it is done in hundreds of different ways. So
Chris, when you return into a character, how does that feel as a writer? Because obviously you've got the first book out there that everyone's read, and that you've sort of established that character. But then how do you put the stepping stones in place to sort of build a character and have your readership grow with that character as well? What's that process like?
I think that particular process, I think, like I said, I think it's different for a lot of people. So if you think of like Lee Child with Jack Reacher, he doesn't really grow. His character arc is for me is very minimal. So with a typical Lee Child book, he will go somewhere on the bus, he'll get off, he'll have coffee, he'll have a little altercation, he'll have a fight, he'll meet a woman, he'll sleep with that woman, he'll have more fights, and he will fix everything in that small village. Then he will get on the bus and he will go. And the next novel is very similar, and he doesn't really change. But I think if you're writing a series, I mean, to be fair, maximum respect for writers who have wrote 10, 15, 20 books with a massive character arc, from a detective being late 20s to 30, and then at the back end of that series, in the late 50s. I think that is a phenomenal achievement. And I think for them, but they would have to know their character inside out. So for me, does April Fisher change much from book 1 to book 2? No, she probably doesn't. She might get a little bit more resilient in book 3, which I'm in the second stage of editing. She is changing. I won't say how she's changing, because the readers will kind of find that out. And in the Darlington series, through the trilogy that's already out, Max and Orion, do they change a lot? A little bit, I would say, yeah. I think the start of it, Max is a lot more driven, where Orion's a lot more laid back. Max is a lot more focused, where he's. But then it kind of changes. There's times when Max was always the one who used to help Orion, but there was times when Max gets a bit low and he's feeling a bit like defeated, and then Orion kind of helps him. So, but I don't think you can. If you intended to write, say, 15 books, you might have an overall idea of that, and you might think, right, the character's going to start there, physically, emotionally, mentally. Then over the course of 15 books, they're going to end there, physically, emotionally, mentally. But I've got no idea how many books I am going to write. I think the working career is a big one. Perhaps promotions or moving various locations around the UK, or if not abroad, that might spice things up and change the characters. And you could implement certain traditions of that area, I suppose. But I do think I've got massive respect for authors who get character arcs down to a T. And I would say, just from what I know and from what I've done with April Fisher and Max Byrd and Orion Tanzy, is just that steady progression. They're in relationships, they start having kids, they get into relationships. Because in theory, if book 1's only 6 months behind book 2 in actual time wise, that character is not going to overly change massively. And I think this is where sometimes a lot of readers, if they're looking for that massive change, unless something like catastrophic happens, like they lose a leg or something like that, they're not going to overly change massively. But no, it's an interesting question, and I wish I had a definitive answer, because I don't think I do, and I just kind of
I think you've answered it really well in terms of the natural progression of a person, and I love the way you talk about characters in terms of, trying to make them relatable as possible and making them like real people. And I think the best characters do that. Brilliant. I just want to touch on one more thing before we go into community questions. We've got a lot of questions coming in the chat, which is great. Keep sending them in. I'm highlighting them all, and I will ask them in the third part of the show. But you mentioned briefly about publishing yourself, and then you've mentioned about your publisher. So I just wanted to see if you could touch on that, because we have a lot of people that watch this show that are writers themselves, that are kind of don't know what to do, how to get into both fields and things like that. So yeah, just touch on that for us if you could.
So I finished my fourth book, which was the third in the Max Byrd and Orion Tanzy Darlington-based series. And I was speaking to an author through Facebook, and he said to me, your next book, it should be with a publisher. I said, why? He said, because I think you are good enough to be able, to be with the publisher, and it'll really help, and they'll assist with the editing and the marketing and that type of thing. So I was going to write a fourth Darlington one, but then I thought, would a publisher or an agent want to take that on? And I thought that they probably wouldn't. So I wrote the first Manchester one with D.S. April Fisher. And that's the one that I queried. I didn't really send it out to many. I sent it to a few agents, and I sent it to a couple of publishers, and Joffy Books, who are based in London, who is my publisher now. I emailed them on the Sunday night, and the Monday morning I got a reply from Steph, one of the commissioning editors, and she said she really likes the idea, because you have to send obviously the novel, a synopsis of exactly what happens in a chronological order, and you often have to do this and fit it onto one page. So you have to compress 100,000 words onto one page and include all the major points. And I tell you what, that's harder than writing the full novel. It honestly, really is. It doesn't sound a lot, but it is, to include all the main points. And so I sent that off. I got the reply, and she said, I really like that. I've also noticed that you have a Darlington-based trilogy. And she said, can I have book one of that as well? Can I have a read? So can you remember that scene in the first Darlington one when my missus took my son to the hospital and she went under the bridge? She read that, and she said that was one of the best opening chapters that she's ever read of any book. So she emailed me back and she said, that's really good. Can we schedule a Zoom call tomorrow? So the next day, there was myself, Jasper Joffy, and Steph, and they wanted the 3 Darlington books, as well as a fourth one which I hadn't written. They wanted the Manchester book that I queried them with, and then they wanted the second Manchester book which I hadn't written, which is obviously that one. So they went through the whole. I sent them the 3 Darlington books, and they went through the whole editing process. They went through the line editing, the copy editing, the proofreading stages. And I tell you what, I'll be open and honest. When you read these massive household names that you go into Waterstones or W.H. Smiths, and you see these authors in the number 1 and 2, and you think, you are gods among our industry. But once you know the process, and exactly what happens, it's a team effort. It's not just a solo effort at all. And massive respect does go to the editors. And like I said, there's 2 different types of editors that look for 2 different things, and then the proofreaders on top. And there's even things that there's errors and mistakes that even get through to like the proofreading stages. And I can only imagine how many stages go through. Do you know when like the big massive names? I honestly can imagine dozens and dozens of proofreaders, because I was reading a book. I won't say who it was by, but they were like a multi-millionaire. And the first page straight away, it just jumped out at me, and I thought, how on earth has that got through? But it does.
Yeah. It
does. But I think doing it on your own, I think, is really good, and it is really honourable. But it's hard work. You have to sort the formatting for your Kindle, the Kindle edition. You need to do the paperback. You need to design the paperback. Obviously, the cover. Make sure you get the spine, obviously, where the spine's meant to go, not like I did with my first one. But then it's the costs of the cover designs. It's the costs of getting it professionally edited. And to be honest, that's a massive thing when you're with a digital first publisher like Joffy or a standard traditional publisher. the help with that, I think's phenomenal, and I don't think you can beat it, because I think often when you proofread your own things, no matter how many times you do it, you always miss stuff. And I was once told this, and I didn't believe it. And when you read it, you know what you're trying to say, so your mind corrects it for you, even though you've totally missed it. And at one of my editing stages, funnily enough, is do you know Microsoft Word? So will probably be my next editing stage for Manchester 3. I will use the read aloud function, and it reads it out loud to you. It's a little bit robotic, and it's honestly, the missus says, "Will you put headphones in? That sounds ridiculous." But it actually is. It obviously highlights the errors, because you're like listening to it as well as reading it, and not just reading it. And I think that's a good thing, I think, if you're self-publishing, because I know obviously if you're self-publishing, the costs for editors and proofreaders can get quite expensive, especially a really good cover design, and it kind of can be costly. So I think I was really fortunate, to be honest, because I think there's hundreds and hundreds of writers out there who are a lot more talented than me, to be fair. But I think I was really fortunate to send that particular email on that particular night, and for that particular editor to see that. But I think it's the same in anything, isn't it? Football, singing, anything. There's thousands of people who probably should be a lot higher than they are, but they just haven't been given that shot. And to be fair, I think a lot of it's a lot of luck as well, which is hard. But I think it's the reality of the world that we're in. So
it's true, but you make your own luck, and if you write the best opening that an editor's read, then you're going to be in the mix. So don't sell yourself short there, Chris. Loads of questions coming in, which is great. We are going to ask them now on the next section. So I'm going to play a quick video, and then we'll get onto the community questions. So this is part 3. So like I said, loads of questions coming in on the chat, which is great. I'm going to ask them sort of in coalition with the staple questions that we have. So I'm going to ask a question from the audience, then a staple question, sort of mix between the two. So the first one is from Jim. Thank you, Jim, for sending in your question. Ask Chris who his biggest influence was. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to say anything different. You mentioned obviously the Da Vinci Code before, and you mentioned Chris Carter and stuff, but have you got an influence?
Yeah, to be fair, I probably do have a couple. And I think that one of the first defining points was probably the Da Vinci Code with Dan Brown, and to be so emotionally invested in a book. One of those where you would read it, and I think at the time I was at school and I was reading it, and I couldn't even concentrate on what the teacher was saying. I just couldn't wait to get home and just stay in and read it. And I think that the feeling that kind of gave me was unreal, to be honest. And I think that was probably one of the biggest things. I read a book by an author called Linwood Barclay, who's probably up there with some of my favorites as well. And his book, Trust Your Eyes and No Time for Goodbye, which he wrote 2008, 2009, maybe. They're in my eyes. I mean, he's wrote another dozen, but they're his best books. And I've actually read Trust Your Eyes 3 times, I think now, or maybe 4. And I just love. I've got it on Kindle. I've got it in paperback. I've got 2 paperbacks of it different, and I've got it in a hardback. And I don't know why, but every time I see it, I just have to kind of get it. I tell you, maybe another inspiration I would probably say is my granddad as well, to be fair, because he wrote a story, and he published it through a vanity publisher. And this, I can't remember when this was. I can't remember how long we're going back. Maybe I'm 35, maybe 10 years. And I was reading the book that my granddad did. And I thought, oh, do you know, this is quite good. And what I did think at the end of it, if he can do it, then why can't I do it? So I'm going to give it. So I think this was between the ages of, say, 22 and 26. And when my missus had lost her phone and said, oh, can you bring it? And that idea of maybe there was someone there, I thought, you know, I'm going to write about this. And I think maybe that wasn't long after I'd finished my granddad's book. So perhaps my granddad was another inspiration as well. Yeah,
definitely. So Paul says, which has been your favourite series to write so far, Darlington or Manchester?
Do you know, that's a tough one, because I love Max and Orion, and it sounds dead corny and cheesy, but they're kind of like, and I know they're a similar age to me, but I see them as like my uncles, like Uncle Max and Uncle Orion, and I know them really well, and they're like chalk and cheese, but they do bounce off each other. But I think the easiest thing about writing in Darlington is that I obviously know the town. I know the town well. But then DS April Fisher, she's weirdly like a sister, and I know her really well. And I loved writing about Manchester, although I've only been there 3 times. So I did a lot of Googling, a lot of Google mapping, which made life obviously a bit harder in that. I would say in my heart it has to be Max and Orion for the Darlington ones, I would say. So yeah.
Brilliant. And that leads us on from the next one from this person who's got a great name, Stephen King. If the Darlington books were made into a film or a series, who would you have play the main characters and why?
So Max Byrd would be played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan. A little bit in his younger years. Do you know who that is? So he was in Walking Dead. Was he in season 3? Jeffrey Dean Morgan. I actually visualize him when I write Max Byrd. Jeffrey Dean Morgan. If you don't know, he's in. Google him, you'll know him straight away. Another one, Orion Tanzy, would probably be Jesse Williams, who is in Grey's Anatomy, and he's got this really short hair. He's tanned. He's got a little bit of a goatee, and my missus, she loves Grey's Anatomy. She watches it every night, and she must have been through however many seasons it is. She's been through it 8 times, and every time it comes on, I'm like, oh yeah, there's Orion Tanzy, and she's just looking at me and shaking her head. But in my head, Jeffrey Dean Morgan and Jesse Williams are the 2 individuals who I visualize when I write them. But thank you, Stephen, for that question. That's a good question.
This next one, again, I was going to ask some of the staple ones, but I will ask another one before I do. Which book have you read that you wish you'd written?
Wow.
This is where you forget all the books you've read.
Probably the Bible, because that's the most read book of all time. On a serious note, probably Dark Matter. Probably Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, because up there with Linwood Barclay's Trust Your Eyes, Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, which was obviously adapted for television. That book, and there's a couple of other Blake's books as well, but Dark Matter for me, and I think I've read that 3 times as well, was for me total escapism. But I don't think I possess the genius to come up with something so sophisticated that went together so well. So that would be my answer, Heath. But I don't think I'm that good. I'd like to think I was, but I'm not on that level of genius that Blake is. But that would be the book. If there was one book and I could say, oh, who wrote that, I'll put my hand up. But unfortunately, maybe one day, something like that. Yeah. So.
And we still got quite a few questions from the community. So I'm just going to ask one of our staple questions and then go back to community questions. So
yeah,
if you could take the ending to any fiction, whether it be TV, film, or books, what would you change the ending to and why?
Game of Thrones. And the reason why, because season 8, although there was maybe 2 episodes out of the 8th season that were good, it ended abruptly. Too much happened too quick, and I know season 8 wasn't based on a book, because I think there's 7 books by George R.R. Martin, and each book was based on a particular season. So I think was it HBO who were they obviously they saw the money in it, they saw the marketing, they saw the audience was there by the millions, and they rushed it, and they just did. I mean, say for instance, like Jon Snow went back to the wall. There's no wall. He went back to the wall to protect the land from White Walkers. They're all dead. So it doesn't. Some of the things that happened was just ridiculous. Like Bran being the king, he shouldn't have been the king at all. All of the good things that Daenerys Targaryen did, or the army that she made, and then she just turned into a bit of a horrible cow at the end and killed everyone. It just doesn't sit right for me. So I think I would definitely have a happier ending. Jon Snow should be king for me. He shouldn't go back to the wall. That wasn't there. And live happily ever after. Another thing I would change as well, just while I'm on this topic, Titanic, right at the end, when Rose is on the wooden door, you've just had a shipwreck. You've got more things to lie on than a wooden door. Or why not make the door bigger and both get on? Go to New York, get married, have kids, and just have a nice family. But,
yeah. Titanic, that's not come up before. I saw a weird TikTok thread the other day that Jack was actually a time traveler. And it doesn't sound very convincing, but when I read all the points that they've made, they made it sound more convincing. I'm not saying I agree with them, but it was a compelling argument. But we'll get back to some of the community questions because there's 5 of them and we're getting close to the hour. So Paul says, when can we expect a new book from you and which series will it belong to?
Good question, Paul. So Joffy, my publisher, have Darlington Book 4. I spoke to my editor this week, actually, via email, and she is looking around the 2nd of January for publication for Darlington Book 4. So I am currently waiting back to see the notes from the first structural pass of that novel. But the whole process of me submitting it to the best of my ability to then it being ready is probably 2 or 3 months minimum. So I think they've penciled it in. I think just to the sheer amount of authors and books that they publish anyway. I think Joffy are publishing 3 to 4, 5 books a week. So they've got quite a big team, but they've got a massive catalogue of authors who have to do a lot of work to market and stuff. So I think it's the 2nd of January, I believe, is the date penciled in for Darlington Book 4. So
nice.
Yeah.
Happy days. James, you sent in 2 questions. I'm going to ask the first one, even though it's a bit strange, but we like strange questions. Who would win in a fight, a duck-sized gorilla or a gorilla-sized duck?
Oh, wow. A duck-sized gorilla or a gorilla-sized duck? Well, I'm going to have to go. Even though a gorilla is naturally stronger than a duck, I'm going to have to go with the gorilla-sized duck, because it could probably stand it. But yeah, that's it.
I mean,
that James Leonard.
Yeah, James has an interesting question. And he also has a more serious question, I think. Even though I would like to see a gorilla-sized duck fight a duck-sized gorilla. It says, if Netflix came to you tomorrow and said, we'll give you money for a film, would you choose one of your already published books or write another one, and why?
I always, when someone says to me, what's your best book? I always say I haven't written it yet, because I believe my best is yet to come. And after the third Manchester book, which I'm editing now, I don't know what direction to take. I think I'm going to delve into standalone psychological thrillers, I think, is my avenue, what I need to go down. So I would say I would write them a new one. Although, depending on how much money it was and how fast they wanted it, that would, I suppose, that would define. If they gave me 6 to 9 months to do it, then I would write a new one. If they wanted it there and then, I would probably give them the Manchester series, I think. So.
Right. Happy days. A few more questions. Stephen says, would you ever, and you just touched on this, but I'll let you expand on it. Would you ever consider writing a different genre of book away from crime/thriller? If you could, what genre would you do and why?
I think the crime and thriller genre makes up a massive bulk of the books that you see on the shelves in the likes of Waterstones and Smiths. But I think they've got a lot of subgenres, the likes of police procedural stuff, which is a lot of the stuff I do, with the help of certain friends in the right places. Psychological thrillers is another subgenre, but I would probably go into horror. Horror would be another option for me, and I would incorporate lots of gore and lots of horrible stuff, but not so much the Saw-like and Hostel stuff. It'd be a lot of suspense, and I would incorporate a lot of like ghosty stuff and supernatural elements. I think they need to be in a good horror. So to answer your question, I would say probably the horror genre.
Nice. And then last question from the community before we wrap up and find out all the good things about where you can find your books and stalk you on social media and stuff. But Paul says, looking back to your Harrogate visit, who's the best author that you've met?
It has to be hands down Chris Carter. I mean, I met Lee Child. I met Michael Connolly, who's an absolute icon in our industry. I've met some really good ones, but Chris Carter for me, because of the way that, not so much the way that he writes, but I think the topics that he writes about really, really interest me. And that elements of gore, and there's obviously elements of police work. There's a detective duo, Robert Hunter and Garcia. I think they work phenomenally well. Very different, but work together really well. And his crime scenes are very creative, and I think his background in criminal psychology really comes into play in his way of writing and the way that he puts a novel across. So, and he's just a really cool guy as well. And he's I don't know what he's worth, but he's not short of a bob a few. He's probably worth millions. But you'll go down to Harrogate and you'll just see him chatting to people as if where I think you meet other authors and they're very much in their own bubble, where Chris isn't. He's so down to earth, and I really respect that and admire that quality in him. So yeah, the answer to that is Chris Carter. Yeah.
Nice, brilliant. So Chris, before we go, the last thing we ask people to do is just sort of say where people can find you online, where people can get your books from. And yeah, anything else that you'd like to say? Maybe someone that you'd like to recommend that people read, or a book that, if they haven't read anything of yours yet, one that you'd recommend them starting on.
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I did have my own website, although the website who I provided it with were asking for silly amounts of money, so I've got a different website which can be found on my Facebook page, but my books they're available primarily on Amazon via Kindle paperback, and they're in Audible. If you've never read any of my books, I would probably start with either book one of the Darlington series or book one of the Manchester series, although all 5 books published with Joffrey can be read as standalones. So whichever one you want, really. So, yeah.
Brilliant. And anything else before we go? Obviously, looking out towards the 2nd of January for the 4th Darlington book, as you said there, potentially, that date penciled in. But anything else that we could expect? Any visits, or have you got any more shows that you're going on, or where can people see you in the future?
I haven't got anything public-wise lined up, to be fair. I think I do see a lot of other authors kind of planning stuff, and I do respect them for doing that. But I'm really, really struggling for time. To be fair, I should make more of an effort. I'm going into Carmel School, which is the secondary school that I attended all those years ago. I'm going in September. I'm going in to speak to all the years between 7 and 11 in their library. So that's the next thing I'll be doing. But yeah, I'm gonna make an effort to visit more bookstores and do like local bookshops, and hopefully get the chance to meet some of you. So look out for updates on Facebook and my different social media sites. So
brilliant. Yeah, as Anna says there, brilliant interview, and she'll definitely be checking out the book once she gets home. In fact, I'm just going to leave that. Yeah, I'm going to take it down. There you go. So, yeah, thank you for watching. If you're watching this back or listening on the podcast or watching now live, thank you very much for spending time with us. If you could like and share it around, that would be great as well. Obviously, it helps Chris out and us as well. Yeah, just share the love this weekend. Chris has missed some football to chat to us. The first football of the season. So, it's great that he spent the time with us. But we'll be back next Friday with another guest. But until then, this is the bit where we wave and I click end show. So yeah, thank you guys.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Bye.